Right beside old Unit 3 sits a shell-marked waste, you see. Tanks of resin stacked with care, holding what the pumps caught there. TEPCO field 2 plans to show. One says yes, the other no. Each awaits a coming call. Neither clears the path at all. So they say, when the work might get underway. Decommission down the line, mid-century's hopeful sign. 880 tons remain, none retrieved from 3's domain. They debate what space to claim, still the Buildington stays the same. From Unit 2, a careful shot, not from 3, not from 4. Still they work around the door, less than a gram. Still asking for
Hello, welcome back. This song is called Less Than a Gram. There's a link in the description if you're catching the live show. If not, you gotta wait for 12 hours for it to show up. You'll find it at James Lucid's site on YouTube. The best music you're ever gonna find. If you're a good person, that music should resonate for you. And you. Woohoo. Here we go. We're going to be talking about Reactor 3. It's August 4th, 2025. I'm Dana. Excuse me. It takes me a few minutes for my vocals to do, re, mi, so, follow, blah, blah, blah. 709-589-4406 in Canada is the magic number. You can call in to these live shows and be heard. You can call in and yell at me, yell with me, or just have a conversation, or just get your word out there. So we're going to talk about mostly Reactor 3. Now, the song you're listening to underneath it is a link to a really important story. TEPCO plans a waste building demolition ahead of debris cleanup. There's nothing there to suggest we're talking about a nuclear meltdowns. There's even less there to suggest we're talking about a plutonium mixed oxide, Medusa nuclear meltdown. And that's the cover picture. That's a very interesting picture. And we're actually going to talk about that picture for quite a bit. We're going to talk about Reactor 3, which I affectionately have named Medusa for the appropriate reasons. Now, can you tell the difference? This picture is at the top of that building, 150 feet above what you're looking at, which we also affectionately call the stump. These are not 190-foot buildings anymore. Let me show you what the building actually looks like, because before it blows up, maybe that'll help. I don't think we do that enough. I don't think a lot of things, but nuclear makes me think a lot. I have a folder called Documenting a Genocide. It's a really, really old folder. 12, 13 years old or something. It's full of goodies from way back when. The way back when machine. We want reactor 6. Picture, hang on. There should be right here, right there. Here we go. Reactor 6. Which, by the way, reactor 6 was completely redacted. Wait, now, let me bring up reactor 5. Maybe it's a better visual. Yeah. These are all exact replicas. There's 70 of these exact buildings in United States, by the way. They're known as a boiling water reactor. They're huge reactors, 190 feet tall, 65 meters, 19 stories. Huge buildings. So you see these buildings down here? That's the same for all 6 reactors. They have that exact same setup. And on reactor 3, you can see the buildings over there. We're getting there. It's a very complicated story in the context of it takes quite a while to tell the story because there's so many facets to the story. So the long building at the very top of the screen is known as the turbine building. Now, if you look at the turbine building, you'll notice there's a lot of debris on that roof. That's really important. We're going to get to that. We got a poll. Did Japan and the nuclear industry fake Fukushima Reactor 3 fuel pool reactor core inventories? And that's an important poll because that story has slipped away since 2021. There you go. Crucial equipment, shockingly feeble looking, mended with tape. Like, you're not putting no tape on reactor 3, okay? It's a Medusa. It's a death sentence. Your organs will melt immediately. Reactor number 3 is like an ashtray filled with cigarette butts. So they're talking about that picture up there. And just to give you kind of context, these are like 19-story buildings, but each story is quite big. So there's only 4, I think, or 5, counting the basement. 5, which is a huge, it's a 190-foot building above ground. And so the reactor cores, which is this depiction here in the top 2 corners, are what's known as the spent fuel pools. This is where they're storing these reactor cores over 40 years. And they're going to change out a huge chunk of the reactor core and put it in the pool every 12, 14, 16 months, depending on the concoction they got it in. They'll add more fuel. So when it cooked off, because it was a plutonium mixed oxide reactor core, it could have had up to 8 reactor cores, full reactor cores, in the fuel pools at the top of the buildings. And if that's the case, then they're gone too. And each of the reactor cores are considered equal to about 100 Chernobyls, because Chernobyl was a graphite reactor, it was a new reactor, it was a small reactor. But it was brutal damage it done worldwide, the radioactive fallout. And it's the only emission on the planet that can make a plume to cover the whole planet is anthropogenic man-made radiation. And there's no species on the planet, the 8 million, including humans, that have an autoimmune trigger that can defend against it. So it attacks it with white blood cells and eventually builds a tumor around it. And then the tumor epidemic was manifested in the early 70s, after all the nuclear weapons detonation. They call it testing, but the radioactive fallout doesn't care if it's in anger or testing. It's the same radioactive fallout. Wow, was to the story. Holy smokes. TEPCO plans. Now, this story is going to come. I'm not going to get to this story right away because of the picture. What I mean when I say complicated. Hang on. I was enjoying that song this morning, listening to Graham, and I know to look underneath his video. And just wanted, it was the first part of the morning, early morning. Wake up in a panic a lot lately, and I got to get my brain sorted right each morning, so it's no fun. But over the next month and a half or 2 months, I should be stable again. That's the plan, right? And so but until that, I'm not used to being in the position I'm in. It's not a very comfortable feeling, right? Okay, so we're going to get to the building. First, we're going to look at the picture. I think that's supposed, yeah. We got to step back in time, though, before we can look at the picture. Because that's the only way you can explain the story. So what I'm going to do is, I'm going to move over to the window where I can zoom in. Is that it? Yeah. So as you zoom in, like when you look at this picture, it's easy to forget about the picture and look at the story. But there's a few remarkable things about this picture. When I zoom in, becomes pretty evident. Some kind of glitch in the matrix that time. First, I want you to think about this building right here. So remember, let me just set this up properly. Oh, I'm going to set up, okay. So remember that building there, inside of it, everything looks beautiful. It's beautiful. I just want to give you that picture, that madness. These are complicated stories, not because I make them complicated, it's because there's so many minutiae of the minutiae, the details of the details. There's so much stuff you got to know to appreciate the actual story. So this was April the 23rd, 2019, and this is allegedly inside of Reactor 3. And that the first batch of Fukushima nuclear fuel is being transferred. Now that is allegedly at the top, way above this building. That part doesn't exist anymore, or the fuel pool. But they're getting fuel into the pool, visible building. So try having that conversation with somebody in the coffee shop, a stranger, and see how far that gets you. Don't have it with your doctor, because you might get up with a drip in your arm for a couple of months. Because you're going to sound crazy. And they're counting on that. And away we go. Here we go. Let's get up. Okay, so let's go backwards. Don't ask me. I think it's 2015 or 16. Maybe 15. This picture showed up, and this was the only picture. It's the last picture I was able to download from the Japanese media. That's almost 10 years ago. 9 years ago. And up to that point, I was to download any picture that they published. The Japan News, all the major Japan, all the bigger media, right? Like the mainstream media of Japan. And so this picture was in very high quality. And now this one is not, but the original picture, this is a screen capture. I was able to zoom in like that. And when I did, I ended up with stuff like this. So that's Reactor 3 cover up there, but this is the Reactor 3 building. The cover, which is right here, doesn't physically touch Reactor 3. Right? They built with cranes, all of this is done with remote controlled cranes. And this piece here is a cover also. It actually hooks onto the frame and is designed to plug a hole like that one up there. That's all that frame is and that frame is. They were built off site, right? And they take a crane and lower it in. There's hooks there, and it hooks on to the building, and gravity holds it there. And then it has all this support. All right, we're getting somewhere now. Now we're really getting somewhere. You're getting educated like you've never been educated on this topic before. Let me do this one more time. And these are the turbine buildings. So this direction towards me is towards the ocean. And when you look at, when you zoomed in on the building originally, I just done that to kill, because I'm foolish. So when you zoom in, why is there all the debris right here and the debris on top of that part of the building? When the interior, and you can see on the roof up there, it's still got all kinds of debris from the explosions of multiple reactors. So when you look at this section of reactor 3, you can see the debris very clearly, right? I'm going to show you reactor 4 too, because and you will never see these pictures that I'm going to show you anywhere else. Because that one picture, I was able to zoom in and extrapolate so much information. There's no one can beat you in that conversation of facts. So when you look inside of this, if you took a architect and engineer, and you showed them this picture, and you said, how much do you? Because the building is missing, you walked them through that part. This contraption was put around it, and they put that thing on top of it. But if you asked them honestly, what kind of shape was the interior, the guts, what kind of shape was the guts of the remains, and this is what he's got to work with, he would tell you, as I'm sure you've already been able to figure out, that there's nothing left. Everything is gone. There is nothing on the interior of the stump of reactor 3, which was a plutonium mixed oxide fuel reactor. Hello everybody, welcome back. Mic check, volume check. Somebody said they lost the sound. That was Colette. Oops, that was her problem. Just messing with you. Don't shoot the messenger. Yeah, thank you. Blop, 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 blop. I'm just going to check the comments real quick. So these contraptions are hooks. They're hooked on, and above it you see like a roof made a new material that compared to all the destroyed material. You can see a steel checkered plates are below that. That roof is just the same thing as this stuff here. Is meant to cover up that hole, because the contraption that they put up there to trick everybody with doesn't cover the whole building. Just don't worry, this will make sense. It takes a long time, and it's not the most popular subject on the planet. I get all of that. There's nothing I can do about it. This is the story. So in this picture, you can see reactor 3 cover, which was built off-site. Then he framed around the building. It doesn't physically touch the building. And then he laid that into place. But before they put those pieces right here, it looked like this, right? It was wide open right there and right there. This piece here, you can see they were getting ready. And then over there, you can see the cranes on both sides. You can see the red crane up there and the red crane right here, right? And there was more cranes than that involved in it. And so you see that the frame itself has a cutout section. And then inside of that cutout section, this below it, this is what they're claiming it looks like. It's like talking to. It's very complicated. So who's going to figure this out on their own, really, without some kind of background in this, in a nuclear, like, and not just some background, but without a serious educational insight into these particular designs, right? All right. So to give you context, that if you were Tarzan, you swing in there and stood up there for about 10 seconds, all your organs would melt inside you. Because of that energy. There's many different ways nuclear can harm you, but in proximity, your organs actually melt. And then the same fuel is splitting atoms on top of it. Not only does it have this pulsing energy from the mass, but the emissions, it's always splitting atoms. And so it's a perpetual machine that nothing on the planet has an atomic trigger to defend against it. It's a very touchy subject, because when you talk about fake and reactor 3 fuel pool, that's a pretty tough. You're talking about around 8 reactor cores that they told you they got out of the building that actually doesn't exist. So I'm not going to get many views. I'm not going to get many viewers that are actually going to show up as viewers, right? I'm not going to get many thumbs that are going to stick to the video after, et cetera, et cetera. But that's okay. This is the story. The nuclear industry, if I didn't do that, there'd be a lot of people who wouldn't have a job, right? They got nobody else to censor for an educational program. So you're looking at it before the cover story, right? That, you know, here we are, Reactor, and we got that video. I might not get to it, but we got the video of them doing that. Like Rupert Winfield Hayes from the BBC. Here I am at top of Reactor 3. And he done the same thing for Reactor 4. Right, so the fuel pools are at the very top of the buildings. And the green stuff you're seeing is the region that they sprayed on it to bind with the particles. And you can see the green stuff all over the rubble. Whoever done that, they died that day. That was homeless and the destitute and the victims of society. I'm going to give you $2,000 cash at the end of the day. You take the hose and go over there and just spray this green stuff. And just watch your dosimeter and you'll be okay. Then at the end of the day, it's like send in the robots to drag out that dead birdie before we send in more homeless. So this was 2021. And what you're looking at is a truck allegedly coming out of the bottom, right down here, of this building here that actually doesn't even exist. Pretty neat trick, right? And so they're alleging that they're getting, people are in the building and they're taking the fuel out, and these 50,000 pound containers on the back of this special truck that's full of massive wheels is going to move it across the street to the common spent fuel pool. There's a lot of things about that picture that because people just get focused on certain things. So why didn't they, if it's beautiful on the inside, why didn't they clean up the debris because this is allegedly beautiful on the inside, right? So why didn't they clean up the debris on the roof alongside of it? So when you look at all of these, the red boxes is damage that theoretically, if this wasn't too bad, they could have repaired, say, this one right here, right? And why would you leave it like that, but have it looking like this on the inside? And then the yellow, you can see the rubbles, right, visible in the pictures. And the red, of course, you can see just incredible debris there. Why didn't they gut that right down to the ground? Would be a good question. That would be a legitimate question. That would be an intelligent question. And that's from these pictures from the story for today, right? And we're going to get to that story, but the preamble sometimes is complicated. So the building actually looks like that. They put a contraption over it, but alongside of it looks like that. As part of that infrastructure. And when you zoom in on it, look at the debris on the roof clear. Look at the melted stuff over to you. But look at this even damage down right here. Like there's no indication that why didn't, because if you were doing a multi-year construction on this building to get the fuel out, surely you would have cleaned up this section here, would you? Well, everything you're seeing for the construction was done by cranes, right? So this whole infrastructure, the frame around it, everything was built off-site and brought in by cranes, right? They leveled the ground around it with remote control excavators and bulldozers. And now we're going to go back to 2017 also. This is this year's pictures we're looking at right now. This is allegedly recent pictures. And so the story is they got to remove one of these structures to make room for the fuel at the top of the reactor, which doesn't exist. Right, so that allegedly looks like that on the inside. So allegedly that's what it looks like on the inside, 150 feet above that stump. So I probably sound crazy trying to say something like that, I'm sure. Okay, so TEPCO delays the removal of the spent fuel from Fukushima, Mari Yamaguchi, no less. Hang on here. Hi, everybody. Did Japan and nuclear industry fake the Fukushima Reactor 3 fuel pool reactor cores, which is around 8 reactor cores, were at the top of the buildings in the fuel pools? So 2017, there's a lot of these stories. This is going to flash through them. TEPCO delayed the removal of the spent fuel from Fukushima reactor to time of reactor 3. That's one thing. Japan delays plans to remove the nuclear fuel at Fukushima. There's all these different medias came out with that story on January, the first of the year in 2017. Fuel removal at Fukushima delayed again. Plan to remove the spent fuel from Fukushima Daiichi power plant, which was reactor 3, number 3 reactor in the first half of 2015. They moved it ahead. The fuel was blown right out of the buildings. I'm going to show you that video of the building 3, which is what we're talking about. We are going to get to reactor 4 a little bit. Here's reactor 3 exploding. It should be right here. Right, in this slow motion, what you're going to see is big chunks falling back down. The big chunks that are falling back down are the reactor core and the fuel pools. And what you're seeing is the fuel igniting when it's up in the air because it's no longer underwater. And when the oxygen hits the zirconium cladding, it ignites at about 1800 degrees. But it had a little help from a massive explosion. The buildings, like this one there, is 190 feet tall. That'll give you some context, hopefully. And feel free to text me or call me to clarify anything. Or comment section. I just need a couple more pictures. We'll be right. Plans to remove the fuel at Fukushima delayed again 2017. So that story showed up everywhere. To give you context of the scope, the size of each of these buildings, by the way, this is a Kevlar sarcophagus frame built off-site and then assembled by crane at Reactor 1. You can see a person stood up there. Yeah, they're small people, but still a person, right? The Japanese are small, but that's still, he got a hat on his head, so he's pretty tall with the hat. No offense to, I don't mean to disrespect anybody from TEPCO. So the building is a very big building. There's 4 layers exactly like that to get to the top of Reactor 4. Which is right there. And so they put this frame that I showed you right here around Reactor 4, and then they used joint panels. You see the joint panels? There's 4 right here to build a a Kevlar sarcophagus around the building. Now, they dismantled that 5 years later. It's still dismantled today, but now they're going to put a new cover on Reactor 1. Now, the material, because it's like a smokehouse of nuclear, which meant that a square foot of it at a subway station, everybody walks by that Kevlar that they removed. If you took a square foot of that Kevlar and put it at a subway station in the wall, and everybody goes past it, they'll die that day for millions of years. That's how toxic it actually is. And everything in that building, if you cut out a chunk of steel, it would have this particular attribute. Utility, or if there's a kitchen sink there or something like that, it'll have the exact same attribute. It'll kill everybody who walks past it every day for millions of years because it's so radioactive. Because it was a plutonium mixed oxide reactor. It was a huge reactor compared to, say, Chernobyl or 3 Mile Island or anything like that. And it was 100 times the equivalent of pure uranium plutonium in the Japanese reactors. Utility delays the removal of the spent fuel. The utility of the Fukushima reactors. Plans to remove the fuel from Fukushima delayed again. Members of the media wearing a protective suit and a mask look at the number 3 reactor. Like it's so like they're saying that head there is a depiction of them looking at number 3 reactor. So like you can see where the top of this contraption they put around reactor 3 is to. But this is the original picture of when they were putting that contraption. So look at the debris inside of it. Do you think there's anything like if there's a light switch or a chair or a filing cabinet or anything functional left inside of that stump, the remainder of reactor 3? So at the top of reactor 3, so when you think about this explosion, right? What caused all that material? What was inside of the top of the building? I'm going to show you the top of the building. This is what the top of the building looked like. Now what you're looking at, these are ductworks for venting hydrogen that was installed a decade or two after the building was built. Because they discovered, because what happens is if you get enough hydrogen, which is created by zirconium cladding in the fuel, you displace the oxygen. When you introduce oxygen back in there, oxygen will cause it the hydrogen to detonate. But the explosion is not caused by the so-called proverbial hydrogen explosion. That's not a hydrogen explosion. Right? It's what that actually is, and I'll play the video, is the reactor containers they're huge, and they're at around 1,000 pounds per square inch. And so when you lost the ability to put water into the reactor detonated because the pressure built up. And you need an enormous amount of water every minute when it's in its chain reaction mode, for instance. And so it needs 1 million gallons of water, 4,500 tons every minute. I'm just going to bring up the calculator so you can, I want you to be able to explain this to somebody. I want you to win a fight or an argument or a heated debate on this topic. That's the goal of what I'm doing here. Is create a million people like me that cannot be swayed from the facts. That they know the facts better than they're able to defeat the apologists, let's put it that way. Or the unwary that is boisterous and loud and is trying to shoot you down. Okay. So here's what the reactor needs each day. For each minute, it needs 4,500 tons. So 4,500 one-ton pickup trucks each minute, or the pressure builds up because of the heat. So it's already at 1,000 pounds per square inch. We're going to cut off the water. So in order to keep this building from building pressure, typically it would need 4,500 times a minute, 1,440 minutes each day. So that's 6.5 million one-ton pickup trucks going past your door every 24 hours. Not 24 days or 24 years or 24 minutes, but 24 hours. So 6,480,000 one-ton pickup trucks of water with 1,000 liters in the back of each one. And if I gave you the keys to 6,480,000 one-ton pickup trucks, and your job was to distribute the keys each day to the drivers, you wouldn't be very happy with me, would you? So it's an enormous amount we're talking about. It's an absurd amount of water each day. And if it doesn't get to water, it likes to go kabooey. And that's really bad for right now, because we have all the whales are emaciated. They actually starved themselves to death. They didn't go on a hunger strike. They starved themselves to death. And that emissions you're seeing right there is not created by the top of the building, because there's nothing there, any sheet metal. Now, it's a very big building. There's a lot of sheet metal there. But the fuel, when it's exposed to oxygen, it catches fire immediately. It burns at enormous temperatures. All right, let's keep going. So 6,500,000 one-ton pickup trucks a day, or the pressure builds up, and so the explosion is the result of the pressure building up, not getting 6,500,000 one-ton pickup trucks each day for a couple of days, and then this happened because you went from 1,000 pounds to multiple thousands of pounds, and that is the force and the energy that you're looking at, not hydrogen. If it was hydrogen, you would see an incredible flame, right? It would accompany that explosion. Now, you probably will see a flame, like a little pop when it explodes. And that's reactor 1 exploding right there. Reactor 3 is quite different, right? The explosion in reactor 3, it ejected the reactor core and the fuel pool. They have acknowledged that. We'll get to that. We're going to show you that. Just slow down. I'm slowing down a little bit to help this very, 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 very important video. That you can download this video and keep this video, and you are armed. You are a weaponized machine against any propaganda. You refresh your memory with this material. You can take screen captures, and you can present a case in court and win that, hands down, if you have an honest system, right? Is that a mosquito? Hello, buddy. How are you doing? Came to visit me. I want your blood. So there's a lot of stories in 2017 of the delay. Now that was the idea, and that's United Nations, the crazies. Right, so when it comes to propaganda, this industry is really thoughtful. They put a lot of time and energy. They have think tanks. They even write books and see how it plays out in order they can fine-tune how they come out and deceive the population worldwide with social engineering. So these stories are social engineering. That's what they're doing. And so they slowly lull the people that are paying attention into a complacency where in 2017, if you had to ask the average person, this would have been the most they would have told you. Well, they delayed removing the fuel, I think. That's what they would say to you for number 3, is that right? And that would be the scope of their insight into Reactor 3. Or Fukushima, for that matter. And this was members of the media with suits and masks, paper suits. Can't protect you. These are a little bit better than paper suits, but they can't protect you. You need lead shielding. So they're most likely homeless people with IAEA written on their suits. That's a more likely scenario. the nuclear scientists are not at Fukushima. Nuclear academics are not at Fukushima. Just checking everything. Looks good. Let's keep it rolling. All right, next stage of the story coming up. Utility delays removal of spent fuel from Fukushima. Utility delays removal. Mary Yamaguchi. So most of the media is just going to regurgitate the Associated Press. They have spider bots. There's around 1,900 major medias that have spider bots. And these are internet terminologies where the spider bot, so-called spider bot, is crawling around on this site, the Associated Press. So say your name of your site is, like James Colbert's site was Fukushima Updates, which he sold to the Fukushima government for a tidy sum, by the way. Apparently he bought a house with the money. So the Mary Yamaguchi, because that was a scam site he set up to lull you, and he fed you all the apologists at that site. He gave them the keys to it. He didn't even, and he's very popular, right? James Colbert is very popular, but he's actually not who people think he is. He denied any adverse effects from Fukushima vehemently and publicly. And he had Fukushima Update, where he allowed all the apologists to post whatever they felt like with no dissenting opinions whatsoever allowed. Utility delays removal of spent fuel from Fukushima reactor. Mary Yamaguchi. Now, anything that comes from Mary Yamaguchi is the official cover story. So 1,900 medias have spider bots that as soon as this is published at the Associated Press, will automatically, with no human intervention, be replicated, regurgitated, with the same author, the same pictures, the same headlines immediately in 1,900 medias worldwide, major medias. And so that's how the social engineering, so Reuters has those same particular attributes. And that's how social engineering worldwide will get the same paragraphs by the same authors and the same pictures at the same time. And then when you come to my site, it's like confusing because it doesn't resonate for the average person who's slowly starting to wake up. Like one of my favorite things to do here is to confuse the people we're onto by telling them all the whales, gray whales, are emaciated, starving to death last year. Someone will, and the same thing now that they're headed north. There was no surviving babies. And they'll look at you for a second and they might say something about football or baseball, but it just, poof. And that's the power of social engineering. They don't have any critical thinking skills. It's kind of like telling your neighbor who was over visiting you, hey, your house is on fire. And they're like, oh, well, I'll put tea on. We'll just have a cup of tea. And you're like, no, your house is on fire. And they're like, yeah, I can clean up the dishes for you if you want me to. You're like, no, your house is on fire. You got to go get your pets out and everything. And they're like, no, they're okay. It's just a fire. Somebody will call the fire department. They'll deal with it. Me and you, we're having a good time. Let's sit here and talk a bit longer, right? And so that's the equivalent of trying to talk to somebody about Fukushima. Their brain literally goes blank. There's like this glitch in the matrix. Their eyes just glaze over for a second, and they just blink it out, and they change the subject. I see it all the time. Like it's not. I'm not. It reminds me that the few people like us that have a moral compass and are critical thinkers is what the planet is dependent upon. The planet is dependent upon us to convince the rest of the world and the people, the policymakers and the investors, that nuclear is a terrible idea and that we can't have a future, we can't have species or a future because of nuclear. And so we have to try to change it so the next generation can do the same thing. And hopefully there will be a future. We're going to lose all the whales within 2 years, of say the gray whales in particular, but the other species are right on that same doorstep. I got another die-off video, mostly whales, unbelievably, and emaciated. I was looking at bride whales this morning. There should be, say, 12, 14,000 pounds, maybe weigh 900, 1,200 pounds. They even say it's severe emaciation. And scientists are going to do a necropsy to figure out why there's no damage to the body. There's no ship strikes and no entanglement. So scientists are perplexed and confused of why the animal died. But they also tell you the animal's severely emaciated from starvation, but clearly that can't be an issue. And what's the term they use for models that eat and then vomit their food, right? It's a term I should know, but for some reason I can't roll it off my tongue here. I'll keep my eye on the comment section. Somebody will. I got it right on the top of my head, but everybody knows what I'm talking about, I'm sure. New images show all the melted fuel is gone from Fukushima reactor. The melted core may have reached outer environment. Outer environment. It's so hard to comprehend who these people are. Clearly, these are people they're quoting, right? Anorexic. Yeah, thank you, Don. So, do you think there was some material got out of that building? Can't tell if the fuel is still contained. The molten core may have reached outer environment. Anorexic is one. Oh, that's right. Though. Bulimic is another. But you're right. Bulimic was what I was searching for, and anorexic is another one. That's a fine term too, isn't it? Don, thank you. La 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 la. So the whales have very low body weight, not because they got on a hunger strike or don't want to eat or are stubborn, because they're starving to death, because there's no food. We broke the food chain. We presume the fuel is still in the containment vessel. So officially, that never happened. So this is very confusing, right? If that never happened, then what am I looking at? Is that a good... Documents showed nuclear fuel burnt through the bottom of the containment vessel. Well, this was their version. They didn't want to admit the truth, but they said, well, some must have burnt through the original. Leakage we observed indicated melt-through by shell attack. A big problem. The fuel debris in the PVC is doing something bad. But when you look at the building, it tells you a different story. It tells you cooked off the entire inventory. And then they sprayed salt water on these reactors for many months, seawater. And seawater, it was a phenomenon they knew about. There was a sulfur peroxide, hydrogen buckyballs is basically the best way to describe these spherical balls from the sulfur, is liberated through the heat. And they're able to ingest uranium, plutonium, and americium. Very little is published about them, but they were well aware of this in saying Castle Bravo, when they acknowledged there was around 5,000 square miles was lethal doses in the downwind of the bomb. Documents showed the nuclear fuel burned through the bottom of the containment. We had just done that. International Atomic Energy Agency, not for distribution, 2013. The molten core is suspected to have penetrated the Fukushima containment vessel. The Prime Minister said we couldn't be in Tokyo if the melted fuel went through the containment vessel. So if they had to melt it out, they couldn't stay in Tokyo. So what they decided to do was just cover it up. This is footage that was released, but officially this never happened. But you can go to their website and download that picture. Many like it. Including this picture coming up. Maybe. That's Reactor, the stump of Reactor 3, by the way. But the assertion that we couldn't be in Tokyo if the melted fuel went through the containment vessel, right? Because originally the cover story wasn't, there was a cover story, but it just wasn't uniformly, symmetrically throughout all the medias worldwide. So when you see these explosions, that's caused by the containment detonating. So that's the evidence of no containment, the explosions themselves. And we know all 4 reactors exploded. And we know it's because they didn't have 6,500,000 one-ton pickup trucks each day to cool it for each of the reactors. Not just total of 4 reactors, but each reactor needed that kind of cooling water. 6.5 million one-ton pickup trucks, which carries 2,200 pounds, 1,000 liters of water. CBS promotes Fukushima area seafood, which is the biggest media in the United States, and Canada for many people, right? Watch CBS. Better if it allowed to contain more radioactive waste. If the food it can contain, it's better. CBS emailed to the U.S. government the best way for the Nuclear Regulatory Commission to calm dissenting American voices on nuclear anxieties to be interviewed by 60 Minutes. So social engineering clearly was considered the solution to the nuclear industry's dilemma. Email from CBS producer, a spokesperson at the U.S. Embassy in Tokyo. So you see that blue link at the top? That's an actual link. It's the same thing with the blue here. Each one of these blues will link you to the mainstream media. So whenever you're seeing these headlines, they're based upon a compilation of each of these stories. Tokyo press conference. Cancer is clearly increasing in Fukushima children. Many experts starting to get concerned. TEPCO has committed a crime. We're going to the police tomorrow, etc., etc. 2013. 2012, there was an extra 865,000 extra cancers. Not everybody got health care. Not everybody was diagnosed. And cancer isn't any autoimmune trigger, defense, or injury or illness, or that's going to manifest. There's heart problems, liver problems, lung problems, respiratory, pituitary, thyroid, adrenaline, Alzheimer's. Mental health illnesses because of lack of oxygen, right? Your body has a lot less oxygen. And so you might come across as a mentally health issue, but it's not, it's hypoxia in your body. It's the same thing for animals. If you start seeing an uptick in attacks from animals, symmetrically, strange behaviors that has never been recorded before, and even more so because we destroyed the phytoplankton in not just the oceans, but the freshwater too. And just the Pacific phytoplankton, the basis of the food chain, the oxygen chain, the carbon sequestering chain, is responsible for around 50% of the oxygen on the planet. And we destroyed that in 14 years. 80 years of the emissions from the industry has added on to that, right? And the dumping and everything else that they covered up. Anything that's splitting atoms, there's 1,000 fuel pools splitting atoms contributing to the extermination of the species and the basis of the food chain, the oxygen chain, the carbon sequestering chain. Which this planet can't, it takes a while, but then it starts to manifest in so you see a lot of crimes, violent crimes, a lot of stupid crimes, a lot of people going to jail, for stupid crimes because you have less oxygen. So it's like being intoxicated. If you drink alcohol or smoke cigarettes, what they do is they displace oxygen molecule, right? And so you have hypoxia. When you get high on alcohol, that's hypoxia, lack of oxygen. And probably even remember when you were young and in university or college, where you binge drink, right? And you get really drunk really quick. But if you stop drinking for 20 minutes, you would sober up a bit, enough to have maybe another drink. But if you don't stop, then you might pass out or get violently sick. Because that's your body's reflex, right? To do that, to stop you from... The reason a person goes unconscious is to preserve the lungs, the heart, and the brain. Because there's something going on. So the body has a trigger to defend itself. And then when you're unconscious, your body tries to repair it, right? Think of your computer trying to fix itself overnight with the antivirus running. Your body's the same thing when you sleep. It's trying to repair, and it does, not trying, it is repairing all kinds of stuff. That's why you should drink a glass of water, a small glass of water before you go to bed. And when you get up, drink another glass so that you can help expel. The water you drink overnight helps your body flush out the bad DNA and chromosomes and cells. And in the morning, the extra glass of water now will help you flush that out of your body. And that's really good. That's when your body repairs itself, when you're sleeping. Strange Japanese press conference calls for jailing a TEPCO. We got a few of these to get rid of. For jailing a TEPCO officials guilty of criminal, says international media damage Japan's brand. But Japan's damaged everybody's food and water worldwide. Mari Yamaguchi. Did I see that there somewhere again? Oh, that's a different Yamaguchi. My apologies to the crazies. TEPCO's criminal error in the media responsibility. Nuclear professor blasted Fukushima Reactor 3 was like an exploding vortex ring. The injection of the nuclear fuel implied there was a criticality excursion and a steam explosion. Right, so they're not calling it a hydrogen explosion. But technically, it was the pressure built up in the pressure vessel because it didn't get its 6.5 million one-ton pickup trucks of water to cool it in 24 hours. I'm pretty sure we can all wrap our mind around that. We all have had that problem, right? Where if our supper doesn't get 6.5 million one-ton pickup trucks in 24 hours, our supper will go bad, right? It's a joke, by the way, sarcasm. The black smoke may have been the burning MOX in uranium. Let's look at this. When they talk about MOX, they're clearly talking about Reactor 3, which is this building. The black smoke wasn't the MOX burning. It was, it was that and the other 8 reactor cores and the fuel pools at the top of the buildings. And so these stories, you would have all the different media's reports on it, and they would be put together to tell you that story. You can see the black smoke is right there is what they're talking about. But see, the black smoke after that happened, you ejected the fuel pools and the reactor cores right into the buildings. Some of it was ejected down into the buildings, right? For every opposite force, for every force, there's an opposite force. When you see that, any academic on the planet, nuclear industry sees that, knows the fuel pool reactor core was ejected out of the buildings. So pretending that there's anything left in the building and calling it a hydrogen is completely dishonest. It's not that hydrogen can't exist, and it clearly can. It's just you got so much pressure, you can't get near the building, you can't cool it down. Keep it rolling. Leader of Fukushima plant started staggering, mumbling, "It's all over before the last reactor melted." The last reactor melted. That's an interesting way, right? It's a nonchalant, when the last reactor melted. Each nuclear meltdown is catastrophic. It's a massive event. So Chernobyl was a small reactor, it was a new reactor, it was a graphite reactor, totally different than the inventories of Japan reactors. And Chernobyl was brutal. There was 9,400 farms, big, huge acreages, were closed due to radioactive fallout from Chernobyl in Ireland, Scotland, the United Kingdom. And so all food, in order to get there, it had to cross Europe, 3,000 kilometers. So all of Europe was contaminated. Not all of Europe, the food should have been banned, right? It should have been evacuated. And then the health, like heart problems, liver problems, lung problems, respiratory, pituitary, thyroid, adrenal, and Alzheimer's, dementia, autism, diabetes, Down syndrome, schizophrenia, diseases like this, illnesses, autoimmune deficiencies, injuries, illnesses, you would have seen, that's when you would have seen that manifest and spike. Up until the nuclear industry, humanity was pretty bloody healthy. We had a massive population of species, and it was just a wonderful experience. Except for the mosquitoes and a few other pests. It was an amazing experience. Life was abundant. People didn't starve to death pre-nuclear industry because there was so much food everywhere. The coastlines were amazing. Ponds were amazing. Migratory species like birds were amazing. When I was young, I grew up in a community with no automobiles, and so we lived by the ocean. So when I was around 13 years old, working on the ocean with my dad and my brothers, my job, because I was the youngest, was to 3:30 in the morning was to drive the boat out to the fishing grounds, and you done that with a compass and a alarm clock, not a watch, but an alarm clock. And that way you knew if you did fall asleep, you woke up when it was time to make your turn. But everything was done. It was all steering by hand, so you were fighting the wheel. It was ropes were attached. You had a big stick connected directly to the transmission to kick it out of gear. You had a stick like 20 feet long, or maybe 15 feet long. And you go out on the Atlantic Ocean, the North Atlantic Ocean, right? As soon as you went out through our harbor, you were on the North Atlantic open ocean, where it was normal for land to disappear in between the waves, right? And what was the point of me telling you that? The species. And so in the summertime, it was normal whenever I could hear everybody was sleeping to slow the boat down because there's so many whales. And I was always afraid I was going to damage the rudder or the boat or something like that. And then, because I got seasick every single day, that was logged in the Fisheries and Oceans log books and submitted every year. So they have a record of the acknowledgement by my dad that I was seasick that day. And it was every day. And people in the community would get on back then there was no VHF radios, there were CB radios. And when we were going out to harbor, before Dad and my brothers would lie down and take a nap, because you leave at 3:30 in the morning after you put your gear on the boat, typically hook and line, right? 400 hooks in a tub, and you probably had 8 or 10 tubs of gear each morning. And at the end of the day, you would have to repair all the damaged hooks and sharpen them and put bait on them, which is squid or mackerel or herring or something, and put them in a cooler till the next morning when you pick them up again. But I distinctly remember that part of it. Always worried that you're going to hit a whale. And that, in order to get your bait, when you came into the wharf, because we didn't have freezers, and you couldn't go to the shop and buy bait. You had to go out in the harbor and jig squid or jig herring or jig mackerel. And many times you get all of them, right? But they were always there. It was such an abundance. You would just go out, and it wouldn't take you very long. You would jig all the bait you needed, and you come back in, and you hand bomb it up onto the wharf and bring it into into the room where all the men were baiting gears and getting ready to do it the next day. So you're hanging out with all these men, and you were a kid, and they were showing you the way of the world that many generations have went through. And so it was amazing species. It was amazing. And we didn't have supermarkets, so my job at 13 years old was to go get 6 or 7 part reach and a couple of Arctic hare. Arctic hare, like, they weigh up to 10 pounds. They're huge. And stuff like that, so we can eat, and then to clean that everything else before it brought it in the house. That was my, it's just a surreal life when I look back on it compared to the way people live now. But it was easy because there was so much out there, and you weren't. Wasn't hard to get what you needed, and you right back home again, do your work, clean it all up, and get in the house and get something to eat and go to bed right away before it was dark, because you didn't have TV, you didn't have radios, and you had stories that was passed down from generations to generations, and sometimes modified, but fairly accurate, because that there was a lot of emphasis in that era of honesty, of a good man and a good woman that was honest. They were honest. If they did tell you a fabrication, they told you the truth immediately behind it, and it was just meant for a lark or a laugh and to lighten a load or something. And I coveted that my whole life, that ability to be honest, right? And so, like, let me put it another way. When I was growing up, because I have a big family, say you needed $1 and you asked your brother or your sister to lend you $1 or give you $1, whatever, and they didn't. It was typical though in family houses, not all, but most houses had this typical routine where the siblings, if you asked the sibling to do something for you, they didn't hem and haw. They said yes or no. It was simple. You didn't care. Rejection wasn't an issue. I'm sorry. They wouldn't even say I'm sorry. They would say no, and then you would ask somebody else. There was no grudges. There was no hard feelings or anything like that. You weren't put on a hook, and you had to wait for an hour or 2 hours to see if they can do that for you, or do this for you, or lend you $1 or whatever the case, because you wanted French fries or something. There was this simple yes or no. And things worked perfectly that way, right? And it's the same thing on the ocean when you're working there. It was always... So Kyoto News leaves a foot. Let's get back into the story. I don't know how we got digressed that time. You can read all that on your own time. I'm not going to take it through, but I figured I should put it there so you get more insight if you were looking for it. Deliberate cover-up, the public's exposure to Fukushima radiation, the health problems they are suffering from. This is now Japan's biggest problem. Continual, purposeful concealment of the facts. We're almost through this stuff. Nuclear chemistry experts steam it, but this stuff is really important because this is a legacy. This is when there was dissenting voices for the most part, because there ain't no dissenting voices in the last 7, 8, 9 years. So this stuff, legacy stories, are very important because that's the original accident, right? It's still fresh, and because it's nuclear, there's so many facets to it. Steam at Fukushima Reactor 2014 could be from the corium burning through the containment into the groundwater. So Reactor 2. So Reactor 2 is one, and Reactor 1. Reactor 1 lost its fuel pools immediately in an explosion on the 12th, the next day at Fukushima. Reactor 2 had multiple explosions, and it basically, to the unassuming person, looks like it's intact, right? But we know it burnt incredibly hot, and in that building, a lot of the inventory went down into the earth. What we call so-called China syndrome. The average person will describe it as a China syndrome, right? Because of a movie. But that concept is just where it burnt its way down into the earth. And in this case here, what happened was it burnt its way down to the earth, It hit water at enormous temperatures, and the water detonated. So that would have separated the pile per se, right? But it doesn't need oxygen to burn forever. That's the thing about nuclear, and that's why it works the way it does. It doesn't need oxygen. The water's not oxygen rich. The water they're using is a special water, by the way. It's a borated water, special material to stop the neutrons from creating a criticality in that environment. It's meant to retard the criticality, the splitting of the atoms, so to speak. So reactor 1, I believe the reactor core itself melted down to the earth. Reactor 2, I believe, a huge amount, and we know it burnt constantly, there's huge emissions for many days, but the building basically remained intact. And because they burned at such enormous temperatures, and because we don't have the ability to contain something that's burning at, say, 9,000 degree Fahrenheit temperatures, which is basically what it's going to burn at, it's gone down into the earth. Now, when it consumes the steel and the rebar at the surface and the rocks and dirt and everything down below, it's going to atomize and aerosol that, very fine particle like smoke, but that's going to be, is going to be radiated particles and particulates that are going to come out of that. A lot of that material that's escaping, even it looks like smoke, is actually fine particles that can split. They're splitting atoms like a perpetual machine forever. So wherever that stuff lands, it's a very toxic forever environment. And they can travel long distances. And then reactor 3 and reactor 4 were completely annihilated. Reactor 1 and 3, we have videos and pictures of the explosion. We don't have it for reactor 4, but clearly when you look at reactor 4 explosion, and we got more pictures coming up really quick here. We're almost there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 more of these to get through. Harvard website, media blindly reports TEPCO's false radiation levels, says Fukushima official. Press won't report the truth. It's still scary in Tokyo. People move away due to hotspots. Environment abruptly changed for half of Japan. The environment abruptly changed for half of Japan. Well, no, for half the planet. In Tokyo, people moved away due to hotspots and never went back. If you got a hotspot from a nuclear event, you need to get out of Dodge permanently. Secrecy agreement, you only get one kick at the can on this planet. Why compromise? Secrecy agreement between Fukushima International Atomic Energy Agency revealed by Tokyo newspaper. They hid the health effects in Chernobyl. The same thing could happen to Fukushima. 2014. I mean, they had 865,000 cancers. Let me show you that. It was a very unusual because they wouldn't release the data ever after that got released. I, being the pack rat that I am, found it through a tweet. I was linked back. Japan's National Cancer Center says the number of patients rose by 865,000 in 2012, a year after Fukushima. The year after Fukushima. Worst since the Nagasaki, Hiroshima. Which is an interesting statement, right? The worst since, because for 70 years, the Japanese government wouldn't acknowledge that people were sick from radiation. In Nagasaki, Hiroshima, for instance, because he said people didn't ingest enough radiation to make them sick. Now, the Japanese, of course, now had lost the war, and they were subservient, per se, to the coalition, right? The United States, to the bigger powers, to the League of Nations, which had changed their name now to United Nations. So United Nations has been around a long time before Hiroshima and Nagasaki. These were conspirator countries were dominating the planet. You know, at one point, Great Britain controlled every island on the planet. Right, had basically captured every island on the planet. Canada is still captured. We still have the strangest thing. We have King Charles's face on our money now. It's the strangest thing you'll ever see. But we're Canadian, allegedly, not British. But our government officials swear allegiance to the monarchy in the United Kingdom and then to the Canadians. So the monarchies, their ideology comes before the Canadian ideology. The enforcement, the rules and regulations, etc., etc. So 865,000 cancers. Not everybody had health care. Not everybody was diagnosed. This is the first year. This is an absurd amount of people. And what else could be the catalyst for that enormous spike of catastrophic illnesses? But it's not just cancer. There's many other illnesses and diseases, not immune deficiencies and injuries. Heart problems, liver, lung, respiratory, and fatal too, right? Japan's government kills their children still now. I'm very worried and afraid. The press conference about Fukushima. There was dissenting voices back early. That's why these headlines are so important. Not all of them were dissenting, of course, but a lot of them were. Those voices don't exist anymore. People who work for TEPCO are not humans. Japan's press conference. They have neither tears nor blood. So you can see the frustration. You can feel the frustration in 2012. And slowly but surely, the International Atomic Energy Agency took over the narrative in its entirety. Yeah, I think James is doing a bit better. Kevin. Hi, Kevin. That's Kevin Blanche. I know he went through hell anyway. I do believe he's doing better. I should text him or call him, but I'm not going to do it to him tonight. I'll do it probably tomorrow. My desire, my wish is that TEPCO should disappear from the face of Earth. You can see the frustration. All right, here we go again. So that's Reactor 3, the original footage type. There's nothing left of the building. This is 2021, where they're allegedly moving the last of the fuel out of the building. That clearly, when you look at it after they gutted the rest of it, there is no fuel pools or reactor cores. TEPCO transfers some fuel from Fukushima plant number 3 unit. And this was this depiction here. Now, I showed you a lot of detail. More of that is coming up in a short while. Since the common pool undergoes regular checkup required by law. So by law, they have to check the common spent fuel pool. And so the reason that they framed the narrative that way was to start lulling people into believing that the common spent fuel pool, which was right behind Reactor 4, was okay and intact. But the pictures that were released, the 736 pictures from the drone footage that were released the same year as the Reactor 3, told a different story. The common spent fuel pool was redacted. Well, give me a minute, see if I can hunt down a couple of those pictures. I think I know where I put a stash of those pictures for just this purpose. Not always the case with me. Yeah, I'm not seeing it. One more try. I might have put it on my main drive. The 1900 pictures, the 736 pictures, I thought they were there. My fingertips, not looking good. 1900 pictures, I got that. Find that, but problem is I have so much. I'm trying to get my brain. I thought for sure I had it right there, but I don't. Let's keep going. So the common spent fuel pool was redacted in footage, pictures, 736 pictures that were released in 2021, the same year that this story was out. Since the common, and I think that was January, was it? The date is probably on the next one. This is 2019. First batch of Fukushima fuel transferred to the. This is when he started. It took him a couple of years to allegedly to get all the fuel at the Reactor 3 pool, right? And this was allegedly Reactor 3. That's what this story is claiming. But that's actually Reactor 3. Has transferred the first portion of the fuel from one of the damaged reactor fuel storage pools to a nearby facility, which is called a common spent fuel pool, using remotely controlled equipment. It's simply not true. The cast will reportedly later be transferred to a fuel rack in the facility's cooling pool. So they're going to put it in a cast and put it in a pool and reopen it. So the cast goes underwater, they put fuel in it, they seal the cast, they take it out of the ocean, out of the water, the fuel pool, and then they transport it on a special vehicle across the street to the common spent fuel pool where it goes back underwater. It's opened up and then they move it into racks to hold the assemblies, which has the fuel rods from. Now, but there is no number 3 spent fuel pool because that portion of the building was at the top of it, so that's gone. But anyway, they came out with that story, and they downplayed the inventories and the meltdown of 3 of the plants, 3. But there's 4 reactors that melted down. Pretending Reactor 4 didn't melt down is the norm. And so we're weirdos because we say that building is destroyed. Now that building should be the exact same height as this building. And I created that to try to give you some context. 7 unspent fuel rod assemblies were transferred. Now assembly has, it's around 1,800 pounds. It has 100 fuel rods in it. The rods are 12 feet long each, and they weigh 18 pounds each. And the rods are zirconium cladding rods, and inside of that is zirconium cladding pellets. And the pellets are plutonium, uranium combinations. It's more uranium than plutonium, but each rod is full of plutonium and uranium, particularly. Now, reactor number 3 was a plutonium-based reactor. And what I mean by that was because plutonium is man-made, so they took fuel that has already gone through a chain reaction, was considered to use. But used in fuel cycle it's 3% so-called energy is used up, but the fuel rod becomes so fragile from the heat and the pressure and the energy that it creates just trillions of microscopic cracks that also release isotopes. And so it's very unstable fuel. It's very fragile, so they have to take it out at a certain point because they're worried that if it gets damaged, you won't be able to take it out of the reactor core, and you might damage the reactor core, and there would be a big fat lip and black eye for the nuclear industry. They don't care about you or the species because those species are gone. And the nuclear industry, 80 years of emissions is the reason why the species are gone. And there's all kinds of chemicals. There's tens of thousands of chemicals we created. There's GMO. There's all kinds of things that did contribute to the decline of the species, for sure, absolutely, positively, unequivocally. But the biggest factor was the destruction of the females by radioactive fallout. And we covered the planet for many decades nonstop with explosions, nuclear explosions. And one of the best examples, of course, was the Soviet Union's biggest bomb. Was equal to 3,800, say 4,000 Nagasaki bombs going off at the same time. Now, in the blip of the nuclear bombs, that's considered one bomb. So Nagasaki is considered one bomb. So they say there's over 2,000 nuclear bombs detonated on the planet. Nagasaki is one of those, and the Soviet Union's biggest bomb is another one. But like it's that bomb, the Soviet Union's biggest bomb is equal to almost 4,000 Nagasaki bombs going off at the same time. So when you divide Nagasaki type bombs into the megatons of man-made or nuclear bombs we detonated on this planet, you're looking at around, and don't quote me, but you're looking at around 38,000 Nagasaki bombs have been detonated on the planet. Now, when it comes to Fukushima reactors, like Reactor 1 and 2, that went China syndrome, they're burning at enormous temperatures. The emissions, because they're consuming everything, is equal to a Nagasaki bombs every day, or many Nagasaki bombs a day worth of emissions. And then the emissions of the fuel pools worldwide, there's 1,000 fuel pools, they're all perpetually splitting atoms, and those atoms are released into the environment through evaporation each day. And each fuel pool, there's 1,000 fuel pools, each one is going to boil off it boils it off by splitting atoms. The atoms are soaked up in the water evaporates. There's around 120,000 tons each day from each fuel pool, and there's over 1,000 fuel pools released directly into the environment. And almost every reactor building is surrounded by farms as far as you can see. And that's really important because that's how you can be hurt and injured, is going to the supermarket and getting food from those sources, because you can't smell it or perceive it or hear it or feel it or touch it or taste it or pick it up. 7 unspent fuel rod assemblies were transferred Tuesday to a common pool, what's known as a common spent fuel pool, 100 meters away, across the street from Reactor 3. First off, I believe the common spent fuel pool, according to the pictures in 2021, the 736 that were released, all those pictures of the common spent fuel pool and the reactors were redacted, and number 6, and another site east of the reactors were redacted. No one knows why they released those pictures. There was no explanation of what you were looking at. But I've actually produced videos where we analyzed it, went through each picture. And this is what we discovered. When you zoomed in, because there were drone footage, very high quality drone footage, original footage, but it was 10 years later when they released it. When you zoomed in on the buildings, a lot of the buildings are redacted. Why would you redact them? Particularly the common spent fuel pool, which had inventories from all 6 reactors. And we assume at least the documentation that we got suggests there was around 10 million, 11 million pounds. And it's a very low reactor. We know the tsunami went through the building itself. And we know that because of transport truck containers that were piled up by the tsunami behind the common spent fuel pool in the pictures that were released in 2021. It's confusing, I know. That's the problem with this story. It's very, very confusing. So the question is, why would there be unspent fuel rod assemblies in number 3, and where would they be? You wouldn't put unused spent fuel rods in the fuel pool with used fuel rods, okay? There was only 2 places, 2 fuel pools you could have put them in. Both of them, because you don't have a repository, has the inventories of the buildings are stored at the top of the buildings in the 2 fuel pools. There is nobody on the planet has a repository for fresh fuel or any other fuel, but certainly not fresh. April 23rd, 2016. I'm sorry, April 23rd, 2019. TEPCO transferred the first nuclear. It took them 2 or 3 years to finish. But this was just show and tell. This was social engineering is what we're talking about. Because the fuel was at the top of that building. At the top of that building, there that they're showing you, and that was the picture of the story we're covering today, the story that started this whole show tonight. The reason we're telling this story tonight is because of that this that one story that I explained to you at the beginning of the show, right? So they built this contraption offsite and installed it around the stump of Reactor 3 to give you the illusion. So this is the story that I started out, we still haven't told. We're an hour and 30 minutes in, we're finally getting to the story. Because you got to lay out your case, right? And there's so many facets that, and I took all the shortcuts I could, but it still took an hour and a half. So that there's no way I can be misunderstood when I say that the buildings are gone. Now, I can do that by showing you that picture, absolutely. I can do the same thing, but where's the fun in that? I can't educate you by... I can, but there's so much information that you need to know about that. The operator of the Fukushima... Here we go. The operator of the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant has submitted a plan to demolish a building next to the number 3 reactor. This is the picture they show you. You can see the buildings over. They're going to demolish one of those little buildings. There's no buildings left there. There's just stumps. And why didn't they clean it up after all those years? Because you can't get near it, see? And everything you've seen there was done with remote control cranes. The new infrastructure was built off-site and assembled by cranes. TEPCO plans a waste building demolition ahead of a debris cleanup. So they're not calling it meltdown cleanup, they're calling it debris cleanup. Remember, this is where they built the cover over it to the deception, to have the deception that we're talking about today. But this story is part of the social engineering. This reinforces the propaganda. That's what that story is about. And what I try to do is break that and make sure there's no way anybody can live in denial when we finally get to the story, right? No, well, Dana showed you all the information. We can download it, we can argue it out, and the evidence is clear that Reactor 3 doesn't exist. Hence the reason we have that particular poll tonight. Did Japan and the nuclear industry fake the Fukushima Reactor 3 fuel pool reactor cores? Because there could have been 16 reactor cores in the buildings. We're saying 8. We're going to lowball it and say it's 8. Excuse me. Like, some of these shows are exhausting. And so Less Than a Gram was the song that I started off with tonight. And that's the song that James put together to tell that story. And the story is linked below that video. And he put out Radioactive Wasp, which is a fantastic song, by the way. I covered that story last week, if I remember correctly. That's a really important story, because there's 130 million gallons of radioactive sludge was boiled off at the Savannah River site where the Radioactive Wasp story is too. That was in the last paragraph, basically, of that story, which is a stunning omission, right? Get back on track here. Let me see what we got here. Just the normal stuff. Let's keep it rolling here. The operator of the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant has submitted a plan to demolish a building next to Reactor 3, which doesn't exist, right? There's a cover and the cover story is one and the same. To make way for the removal of the radioactive fuel debris. So so officially now they claim they got all the fuel out of the pool. I showed you that evidence a little bit. And now they're claiming that they're going to get the fuel out of the reactor. But the reactor was at the top of the building and it doesn't exist. So they're laying the foundation to reinforce the propaganda. And it's done through social engineering. And is piggybacked out by spider bots to aggregate it instantly worldwide. So everybody gets this story. So if you were to ask somebody tomorrow or next day that's reading this kind of material, this is what they might regurgitate to you, is the official cover story. And that it would be 2041 to 2051, the decommissioning plan is expected to be time-consuming, hindering plans by Tokyo Electric Power Company, which shouldn't exist, is not a decommission authority, and was hated by the Fukushima prefectural government for many years. Was hated, and still is, but through perpetual and enormous amount of money to rebuild a reputation that they don't deserve. They were nationalized right away, by the way, which means the Japanese government took over because they were on the stock market, and the nuclear industry should never be on the stock market. Like, not many coal plants are on the stock market, not many oil plants are on the stock market, not many gas plants are on the stock market, but almost every nuclear reactor is on the stock market because it makes it impossible to get rid of it because you're dealing with shareholders, right? And they have corporate personhood to protect them, which is an illegal amendment to the slavery law in the United States that the industries use to give themselves certain human rights, not all of them, but certain human rights, which protected them from a lot of scrutiny. And before they were beholden to the country and to the charters, if you committed crimes like TEPCO committed, then they could be jailed and their companies could be dissolved, liquidated to pay restitution and outstanding debt and reparation. But now there's no incentive because they can't go to jail and they can't be held accountable. And so that's why you would never want to have an industry with no liability. They have no liability. The Price-Anderson Act, a disgusting, a horrific betrayal, has mitigated any kind of penalties for the nuclear industry and hoisted it up on the countries that are hosting it. The country, which is the taxpayers, right, are vulnerable to an accident, and it could take 100 years to clean up the site, and the amount of money is sickening. Just for, they picked up 30 million one-ton bags, and they had spent $48 billion of taxpayers' money. TEPCO was broke right away, right? The government of TEPCO hoped to begin retrieving fuel from the reactors that suffered core meltdowns. So what they're suggesting the cores are still intact. We'll challenge that in a minute. An estimated 880 tons of fuel debris remained in reactors number 1, 2, and 3. The fuel pools could have had upwards of 8 full reactor cores in each building, or even more. But Frank von Hippel had made that assertion, Professor Frank von Hippel. Additional space in March 16, 2011 on MSNBC, which is a major media, right? Additional space is also needed to store the waste currently held in the structure. There's no waste being held at Reactor 3. Reactor 3 is a no-go zone. It's a death zone. Excuse me. I think this might be I might have a picture of the common spent fuel pool, by the way. I might have just accidentally found it. Yeah, this is the common spent fuel pool. That's Reactor 4. And when I zoom in, you can see how everything is redacted, right? But on the back of it, this is, because the tsunami came in this way and washed up along this big wall, and it piled up all of these transport truck containers behind the common spent fuel pool, which is right here. And so that's towards the ocean that way. And this is a short building. Fukushima reactors are 19-story buildings, 190 feet, 65 meters. This is only about half the height. And so the fuel pools are much lower, very vulnerable, and they didn't have ability to put water in the pool, or because once you get salt water in there, everything changes. You need boric, or you're generally adding boron to the, not generally, but you're adding special water, demineralized water, with boron to stop the neutron excitements in that water. So when you add salt water in there, you take away the ability for the, and so they could cook off without, like Reactor 2, where the damage is not incredibly visible. Now, there was another facet to Reactor 2 and Reactor 1, was there was 6 places where the earth cracked open alongside these buildings from the China syndrome. And this is a dirty explanation of what happened, where it went down into the earth, right? It burned through the containment at enormous temperatures. And then the earth is cracked open. The steam coming out of the ground, not always visible, you need the right conditions. The steam coming out of the ground was at 10 sieverts per hour in 6 places. 6. And 3 sieverts is considered a lethal dose. So 10 sieverts, which is the max, by the way, of the stationary Geiger counters that they were using, meant that anybody in proximity is a lethal dose. And wherever this stuff falls, that becomes a lethal dose too. And so they had to abandon the site for extended periods because of the emissions coming out of the earth. So there is some kind of China syndrome going on for sure. And that's what you would expect these, the earth cracking open due to the expansion of water. Water expands, like a liter of water will expand 1,600 square feet or something in a millisecond or whatever it is. And so when you have a volume of water come in contact with a large amount, so you will separate the core underground when that happens in that scenario, right? But now you got all these melted cores all over the place, chunks wreaking havoc forever, and you can't contain the emissions because the earth is split open. If you do contain it, if you do build a contraption over it to contain it, you could have another explosion. So you're stuck between a rock and a dead planet. And samples of a melted fuel weighed less than a gram. That's where the last 4 words, less than a gram, is the name of James Lucid's song that we started off with tonight, right? That was talking about the story, less than a gram. That's amazing song. I love that song. Holy smokes, was that ever good. Each was retrieved from number 2 reactor. I mean, you know, it's such a terrible story. Music is a wonderful beast for soothing the truth. Each, like telling the truth, I guess is a better way to put it. But each was retrieved from the number 2 reactors in November 2024 and in April. So they're talking about samples now, right? They switch gears. They're talking about samples from number 2 reactor in the same story because that social engineering is really important too, right? So they constantly conflate stuff like that when they're putting out these, because these stories are meant to kind of go viral. Now, I never found that story on my own. It didn't show up in my news cycle, but you got to realize I cover a lot of different topics, so I don't always focus on the news that current news in Japan, right? Because I do a lot lately. I'm doing a lot of die-off material. I'm gathering up. It's just, I missed it anyway. I didn't find the story on my own. So then they released this picture in the story, which was Japan Today, this particular version. And when you look around the site, you can see the destruction, and it wasn't repaired yet. They have this contraption on top of Reactor 3 that allegedly was beautiful inside. But when you look at the roof behind it, why is all that debris there? Why is that debris right along, which is the turbine buildings, right, which is spinning up the power. And look at all the radioactive debris. Now look at the boards they laid over one of the holes on top of the turbine building, where one of the fuel assemblies were rejected, several had came down through the top of the turbine building, which is seaside to the reactors. And so I was zooming in on that picture. That's the first thing I'd done this morning was I expanded the picture, started zooming in, and I do this all the time where I extrapolate all these pictures. And I'm looking at all this debris, and I was like, oh, shit. Now, because originally I'm just zooming in, I'll always take a snapshot of it. And then I'll go back and look at it and see what I'm looking at, so to speak, right? Because your mind can get distracted. So, let me get up there and point this out for you, actually. A little bit. So this is reactor 3. This is steel sheets, 8 by 16 foot steel sheets welded together and then laid in there by a crane. Right, you can see the guts of it right there with my fingers too. It's the same thing here. This is the alleged contraption of the building. And that frame back there it was laid there, built off site and laid there, and so was this piece right here. And so that's the turbine building. That's towards the oceans that way. So I'm zooming in on that picture from today, and I'm going back in time to 2019 and looking at the pictures of what they said Reactor 3 looked like back then. Right, and so that picture is inside, I'm sorry, this is Reactor 4. That picture is inside of that building, which is simply not true. So, Reactor 3, you can see the debris on the roof up there. You can see the debris alongside of Reactor 4, which they're the exact same designs. And so those little outbuildings alongside of the reactors have the same thing here, where they alleged they were in there years before this, by the way, like 7 years before that, and got the fuel out of the pool, which they say is the top of the building, but the building is down here. That part doesn't exist. That was the cover story. I mean, you just got a few of these to get through. Another reactor. So this is day 2. All the functions to keep the cooling water levels number 3 reactor failed. This is day 2, March 12, 2011. Explosion at Fukushima could only have been caused by a meltdown of the reactor core. Well, there's two thoughts on that, right? Yes, it could be caused by the meltdown. And for many years, that was my take too. But the reality of it was they need 6,500,000 one-ton pickup trucks a day to stay cool. 1 million gallons a minute, 4,500 tons a minute. And so the pressure will build. They're already at 1,000 pounds plus per square inch, right? So the pressure is building because they got all this heat and they can't get rid of it. And that'll cause an explosion too, right? The meltdown explosion would be different than what we were able to see in the videos. That's my assertion, but I have a good reason for saying it, and I've already laid it out earlier. I'm not going to do it to you again. And this was March the 12th, so they're talking about Reactor 1. I showed you the Reactor 1 explosion too. Officials presume that the 2 nuclear reactors have now had meltdowns March 13. So they're talking about Reactor 1 and Reactor 3. Radiation at 400 times normal level, 60 miles on March the 13th, nearby another nuclear plant 60 miles away. And this was, I believe, north toward Aikido, towards China, basically, right? Nuclear plant designer, Tokyo is suppressing information, serious meltdown, highly likely. And yes, there was definitely, because the explosions ejected the inventories, the fuel pools of reactor cores from Reactor 3, for instance. But Reactor 2, a lot of it would have melted down and gone down to the earth. And with Reactor 1, with the explosion, you lost a huge percentage of the fuel pools, which could have been 8 massive reactor cores. But you also drive down. In order to have an explosion going up, you'll also have an explosion going down. And that could have caused the meltdown of the reactor core. So you have the reactor core, which is at the top of the building, by the way, and the fuel pools, which are at the top of the buildings. And we do believe that that was the fuel pools. We have a lot of evidence, not just believe it, we're sure of it. The fuel pools cooked off at Reactor 4. That was the inventories we've seen in the explosion. Nuclear fission, but there was something that went down into the earth of both of those buildings. Reactor 3 and 4, Reactor 3 clearly ejected the fuel pools reactor cores out of the building. Reactor 4 lost its inventories. And when you look at the damage, and you look at the official pictures of what, what was interesting was, we have cameras, so why didn't they give us a clear picture of the fuel pool of Reactor 4 when they were gutting the building? They no longer had the world's biggest cement mixer, or what do you call it? Crane? The crane trucks, where you can reach out with cement. These were modified to take water to put into the fuel pools, but the fuel pools can't operate on water. They need bore-rated water. If you spray just water in there, you're going to have a criticality because you have nothing to control the neutrons. And you have a huge inventories in the fuel pools. So spraying water in there is not a solution. It's a band-aid to pretend that they got it under control or that they're doing the best they can. But clearly, it's not. If you'd done that to any reactor fuel pool, just sprayed in seawater or even fresh water, you're going to have a criticality. It's going to melt down, it's going to blow up fairly quickly. So why would Fukushima be any difference? And Fukushima had no power, and you need enormous amount of water each day. Nuclear officials confirmed explosion number 3 reactor on March 13, 2011. This picture was from 2013. Where did that come from? I'm going to show you a picture of the original picture. So to your left, officials confirm an explosion at number 3. So this is the number 3. And the top of the building is gone. And that's where the fuel pools reactor cores are. Even today, they refuse to acknowledge the fuel pools are lost. They never will admit it. It'll never happen. It's never going to happen. But it did happen, right? It really did happen. We're really in trouble. We're losing all the species. We have, like, a prime example recently is we have all the gray whales, or what's left of them. 14,000 died since 2015, since the food chain been broken. And the 13,000 we have left now on this planet are severe emaciation, severe starvation. They were starving and emaciated last year on a 12,000-mile migratory. They're just dying everywhere now. And they're doing a good job of covering up the reason. But soon they'll all be dead. And you can't blame all the whales died in a decade because of ship strikes, okay? They can't just say, well, no, the 27,000 whales that we had in 2015 died in 10 years, 11 years because of ship strikes. You can't blame all the deaths on the ship strikes. This is what they're trying to do. And according to NOAA in 2007, the total number of whales and ship strikes, not necessarily all dying, was around 1,200 worldwide. So how can we have all the whales now are dying from ship strikes? Well, San Francisco, for instance, is a busy harbor, so you can pretend there that that's an issue, and it certainly is, but that doesn't account for the migration, right? Species. You can't say all the species are dying from ship strikes. Even if you say the Earth are trying to run the whales are not stupid. They coexisted with ships for over 100 years. Radioactive cloud hits the United States aircraft carrier sailing the Pacific, the USS Ronald Reagan. The helicopters were coated with radiation. There was 11 helicopter engines had to be changed out because of the radiation. They couldn't fire it up because it would radiate everybody close to it. So how much radiation was it ingesting? And at one point, the USS Ronald Reagan was within 1 kilometer of Fukushima plant. And at that point, because, digital watches were a big thing, right? Still are. All their watches, there's 5,000 people in a ship. just hundreds or thousands of people's watches stopped working at almost the same time from the plume. So how bad was the plume? It was bad enough on top of that, that the bathrooms were all plugged up and people were defecating in the hallways and everybody was sick. They've all been denied any adverse side effects from the radiation, and they sacrificed everything. I mean, they changed out 11 helicopter motors because they were so radioactive. But nobody got sick. It's absurd to suggest, right? You know, all the helicopter pilots at Chernobyl died within a couple of weeks. There's 600 of them. You won't see that on Wikipedia either. Radiation around Fukushima nearing levels where humans vomit uncontrollably and hair can be stripped from the bodies. And if you go back through my videos to the anniversary of this year, you're going to find where we took Harvard University, Yale University, Stanford University, I think were three in particular. We've done this many years ago, but we took those three original presentations post-Fukushima that the university's done, where they downplayed every facet of Fukushima, and we challenged that with the documentation that, because we have hindsight, right? Harvard University acknowledged there were plumes going through the communities at around 10 sieverts, lethal doses. And that 3 sieverts would have been a lethal dose with a short exposure in that particular environment. And remember, there's around 3,000 people were taken out of shelters to emergency units, to hospitals in catastrophic health decline. And if they didn't evacuate, it was too late when they gave the evacuation orders, but if they didn't evacuate every people when they did, they would have had thousands of dead people in the streets that could only be explained by radioactive fallout. And then, of course, that would be the death of the nuclear industry right there on the spot. And so they evacuated and they actually blamed the death on stress. Now, we've seen millions of people evacuate because of hurricanes, for instance, and typhoons and supercell cyclones. We've never seen any 3,000 or even close to it, people just randomly dying. They died in Fukushima from the radioactive fallout. TEPCO reports fuel rods number 2 reactors of Fukushima plant may have partially melted down. TEPCO. That's a very important headlines like this. That was March the 14th, by the way. TEPCO, fuel rods in number 2 reactor were fully exposed. If the rods are exposed, they would never get fully exposed unless because they would catch fire. And so then that would boil off all the water. So when they come out and suggest that they were fully exposed, before the water can boil down, that because the chain reaction doesn't need oxygen. Once it starts at the top that's exposed, it'll burn down through the bottom, even if there is lots of water. It'll still burn away. And we're talking at 5, 6, 7,000, 8,000, 9,000 degree Fahrenheit temperatures. So if the rods are exposed at all, you have a chain reaction, a nuclear meltdown, I should say. And if you have a nuclear meltdown, you can't have a partial nuclear meltdown. Whatever fuel is there, because you have such enormous temperatures, you're going to lose the water. It's going to flash boil off, and then that fuel is going to melt down. TEPCO's fuel rods at Fukushima number 2 reactor were fully exposed. That's March the 14th. One more and we got pictures. Worst in a meltdown. The spent nuclear fuel pool catches fire March the 15th. New York Times. They downplayed it, by the way. They put these contraptions over it to pretend that it didn't happen. And, inside the building you're looking at there, the big round, half-round building, it looks like this. But outside of it, the debris hasn't been cleaned up. Even the damage hasn't been removed or repaired. All the infrastructure there was done by cranes, or homeless were sacrificed. That's the cover story, right? First batch of Fukushima nuclear fuel transferred to storage facilities. This was BBC Rupert Winfield Hayes claiming that he's on top of the building that doesn't exist 6 years ago. He'd done the same thing for Reactor 3 right there. He'd done the same thing for Reactor 4. The Tokyo Olympics is a radioactive Olympics. And look who shows up there. A site set up to attack me and Kevin Blanche, to denigrate the stuff we're talking, to dilute the facts. He showed up in the comments section. Of everybody who said anything bad, he showed up and said the opposite of reality. And then he also came in with his other scumbag site known as Forbidden TV. And he always likes to say how he challenges me to a debate, but I put my phone number on the screen every night. He says I'm ducking him, but my phone number is on the screen every night, right? And he got a site. He owns both of those sites. The sites are set up to attack me, leaving comments there so people start hating the name Dana Durnford, see? And Kevin Blanche, right? That's why he's using the name. He'll start up and argue with people so people... Because the average person won't come and find who Dana Durnford and Kevin Blanche is. They'll figure that he's the bad guy, right? That's why they do that. And I tried to have his site taken down, I don't know how many times, because it's illegal on YouTube to do that to somebody. And yet as far as we know, he gives the keys over to TEPCO, to that YouTube site. And you'll see his comments where in the thousands and thousands and thousands of comments that I've put on YouTube, nobody's ever beaten me. So he's out there trolling all the time, right? So they're claiming that this is at the top of this building, 150 feet up in the air. This is what it looks like. That's Rupert Winfield Hayes, the BBC, in 2020, I think it was. 6 years ago, rather. Yeah, 2020. Pretending they're on top of the building. Spent fuel removal is done by robotic cranes, but he's on top of the building where nobody's ever been. Nobody can go because the building doesn't exist, as I showed you. And another thing in the story was you're talking about the 30 million one-ton bags, where they were being buried in the ground, and then this was the layer below it was 4 or 5 layers in the bed of the ground, and then they were storing some of the 30 million one-ton bags. Now they made 60 million of the bags disappeared. Now they say there's only 14 million bags. So Kim says, which is South Korean, says boycott Japan. And the trolls taking my name and it's just horrifying that somebody would do that to you. And these people are prolific. Whoever is running that site, which we thought was Craig, but Craig has to eat and breathe. That site is out there all the time. No, and he says no one died from Fukushima, but the death rates will give you the creeps. TEPCO concealed radiation data before the explosion number 3 reactor. Workers not informed of extremely high levels. So there was so much information showing up. Thank goodness we aggregated as much as we could. Reactor 3 exploded a second time 24 hours later. Then wind and rain brought to high levels of radiation over Tokyo, Sendai, and Nagano. And Nagano, all right, they've removed the restrictions. High levels of radiation over Tokyo, 36 million people. And when they say high level, brother, sister, you got to realize it's absurd. Radiation expert, North America has received quite a large fall, incredible increases in cancers, leukemia, genetic diseases, not just in Japan, but the Northern Hemisphere. Genetic diseases, heart problems, liver problems, lung problems, respiratory, pituitary, thyroid, adrenaline. Would be like Chernobyl on steroids if the spent fuel catches fire. Each building holds 3,450 assemblies. Each assembly is 1,800 pounds. So when they tell you the official number, remember each building had multiple times the official number that they're saying is left. The unimaginable NHK, which is major media, 2012, was happening. Workers say part of Reactor 2 containment vessel was destroyed. There was no pressure because you lost power anyway. That was the official cover story showing up. Cover up a massive explosion of Fukushima Reactor 3. Entire nuclear core injected into the environment. It seems blast wasn't from hydrogen. Well, clearly the blast would have been most likely because it's a high pressure reactor, it's got no cooling. It was a pressure explosion. Same as you put too much air in your tire, eventually it'll blow up, right? Reactor 3 fueled with plutonium. Entire nuclear core injected into the environment. We're almost finished. Potential global catastrophe from Fukushima Unit 2 highly radioactive fuel. Reactor could be destroyed. Reactor 2 could be destroyed, making Tokyo area uninhabitable. Already partially liquefying below the reactor. Now that was the cover story for Reactor 3 and 4 and Reactor 1. But Reactor 3, if number 2 can make Tokyo uninhabitable, 36 million people, 240 kilometers away, why couldn't Reactor 3, the plutonium mixed oxide Medusa reactor? So Reactor 3 and 4, the official pictures. The media came in, pretended they're in the building. But when you zoom in on the building, this is the only time you'll ever see this picture, right? It was extracted from a very high quality. I think it was like 7 or 8 megabytes. Very unusual. It was published in full format, it was a raw file. And I snatched and I was able to zoom in and extrapolate these types of pictures. That's Reactor 4. And look at the debris there. And yet it's supposed to be beautiful. But inside of it's supposed to be like it is to the right. There's 70 of these reactors in the United States, so that's where they shot those videos. And look at the connotations. It's time to make a geyser. So, like, the people that are having that conversation, that's an incredible derogatory term, right? It's time to make an older person suicide squad. And then these pictures of people in paper suits with their plastic bags with TEPCO written on it, allegedly walking into Reactor 4 is absurd because there's only a stump left of Reactor 4, as if they're, like I think the narrative for the picture was workers leaving Reactor 4 for their shift or something. It's absurd to suggest that anybody's physically working at any of the reactors. This is absurdness. Former Fukushima Daiichi worker believe the country will be evacuated. Number 4 fuel pool collapses. That's what he rolled out to media and said it didn't collapse. They should have evacuated Japan, Canada, and the United States because of the prevailing winds, right? And this was the picture. That's not the original picture, right? It's not like the high quality one, but it's a screen capture of it. We were able to zoom in on these buildings and infrastructures and able to glean absurd amount of documentation. That's Reactor 3. You'll never see that picture anywhere. Only here. That's the only spot you're going to see that documentation. Because that's the only time we had access to a high quality picture, we were able to extrapolate this kind of definition, right? And then, we've never seen a building from this angle before either. Like up close like that with decent quality. And that's why. Because they faked Reactor 4, they faked Reactor 3. That's Reactor 4. And you see the debris on the roof over there? It's the details that are so important. So when you see the guts of your building, and that's what you're seeing, there really isn't anything left there. And the height of that building is nothing. And when they put this stuff over it to try to make it look like a high building again, but that's all they were doing. They were trying to make it look to manipulate and deceive the consensus. And the evidence we have is unassailable. The documentation is the reality. What I'm telling you is the reality. What I'm providing you everything from my assertions for this whole show and every other show. My opinion is not really an opinion. my opinion per se, is the facts. Because that's the best way to tell a story and to have an educational program is to do the ridiculous amount of work and provide you with the facts. So that I don't need to convince you because you have the evidence yourself. You don't have any illusions. And so we have all these other pictures of Reactor 3, all the different angles, every angle you can dream of. There is no fuel pools, there is no reactor cores. It's long gone. It was gone in the first week, all of it. Right, because the fuel pool reactor core is at the top of the buildings, right? It's gone. And how much evidence do you need, by the way? You don't need as much as I gave you. I gave you more than enough. Crucial equipment, shockingly feeble looking, mended with tape. Reactor number 3 is like an ashtray filled with cigarette butts. That's it. We made it. We got skunked again tonight. Dana Asana spends more money trying to cover it up than to clean it up. That's awesome. Darlene says she got 3 different devices and YouTube is playing games. Hi, Kevin. Cyclops. Starlight. We know James is recovering. He's doing a bit better from what I heard. David, good night, everybody. Petrov. Just scrolling back through the comments quickly. Colette. Hi, Colette. Dan Asana, of course. Dab Bog. Alrighty, that's it for us tonight. That's what we got. Serious censorship tonight because we're talking about such a touchy subject. Censorship. 13 viewers. There's more than that, I'm pretty sure. They don't like the poll, and they don't like the evidence I showed you, big time. Did Japan and the nuclear industry fake the Fukushima Reactor 3 fuel pool reactor cores inventories removal? Yeah, Dana, of course they did. I know. All right. Because when you put these shows together, there's so much stress. And you got to tell the story, right? And you got to sit there and put everything together. You put the story together, and then you got to sit there and tell it. Like if I just got to put the story together, it's a sickening amount of work. But then you got to sit there and tell the story too. Yeah. It's crazy. And we do it because we love this planet. We love the people. We love the species. We love the water. We adore the water on our planet. Our best friend is the water. And I need something with a bit of energy, so I'm going to go with James. I just showed you James got a new song he published last night. And I should play that one, but I want to play one of my favorite songs is on my mind a lot every day now. Is this song here. Nuclear Exceptionalism. It's like an upbeat song because we just went through an enormous amount of highs and lows telling the story tonight. And so I need something to finish my night off. And James got a really good song up there about the radioactive wasp. And the story below it is really important. And we touched on that last week, last show, or second last show. We're going to play Nuclear Exceptionalism. I consider this one of the greatest anti-nuclear songs ever, history, period, bar nothing. The greatest songs, I should say. Have a great night. Hugs for everybody. We'll see you in the next one. Take care.
They said it was clean, too cheap to meter. Built the dome, then cooked the beaker. Said the rod was safe as sealed in drums, but left them leaking out of Idaho slums. Hallelujah, being anti-nuclear's not dumb. Hallelujah, being anti-nuclear is fun. Hallelujah, being anti-nuclear has won. Hallelujah, nuclear exceptionalism is done. They chase the sun, all fusion proud. Ignore the barrels stacked in clouds. Promise stars in every socket, while curium settled in the market. Hallelujah, being anti-nuclear's not dumb. Hallelujah, being anti-nuclear is fun. Hallelujah, being anti-nuclear has won. Hallelujah, nuclear exceptionalism is done. Chart is clean, while whales rolled up beside the submarine. Blame the algae, blame the rain, but never trace the gamma chain. Hallelujah, being anti-nuclear's not dumb. Hallelujah, being anti-nuclear is fun. Hallelujah, being anti-nuclear has won. Hallelujah, nuclear exceptionalism is done. Now the rods are rusting, the record spins. Mama warned them, too many sins. Keep your son, keep your lab coat pride, till you fix the waste you tried.